And then once Joseph's wound that up, I'll give you the feature presentation about the Monkey Tool software here. So, Jana, it's yours if you want to take over the screen and do what you need to do.
All right. Thank you, Ken. So first of all, I would like to say that while my screen is loading, that I'm recording this meeting. So everybody that is not comfortable in being recorded, I'm sorry about that. And they're free, of course, not to join us. The next thing is please turn off, and I'll turn off my camera and my microphone too. So Joseph and Ken can present, and you can turn them back on at the end of the meeting if we would like to socialize. So with no further ado, just 2 minutes about instructor-led training. I'm Jana, I'm a PM in the instructor-led training for the Power Platform. So we have obviously our dashboard in a day. Each month we have a new instructor-led training here for dashboard in a day. You can download your attendee version, or if you are a partner and a Microsoft trainer, you can always download the content itself and train. There is a new content here this month, which is Power BI Developer in a Day course. You can do it as a self-paced course, or you can do it as a instructor-led training course, and you can download, everybody can download and train on this content. So it is also in docs, and it is online mostly about embedded content, and it has and how you can come from zero to hero and do Power BI development. So Developer in a Day is also got many videos, so all the content is recorded and you can watch with self-paced if you don't want to do it as an instructor-led training. So all of you who are instructors, please do download, and you can reach out to me or create your online course and get started. All the Power BI training content can be found here in aka.ms PBI training, and I will put the link in the chat box. And from data visualization, dashboard in a day, modeling, and of course the new dev in a day and paginated reports in a day. Two meetups that I wanted to pay your attention to. Next week, June 25th, Will Thompson from the Power BI team, the one and the only, will be sharing his favorite Power BI tips, tricks, and features. So that is the one that you might consider joining. And Power BI data visualization makeover that was just published by Megan Longoria. For those of you who follow up Twitter, Melissa and our Power BI administrators, Melissa just published her new administrator tips and tricks for Power BI that she has created, Melissa Kos. I really hope that the recording is available. She had the meetup last week. So without further ado, it's 6:04, and I hope that Joseph can take it away from here and with the Power BI new and exciting. So thank you.
Thanks, Jana. New and exciting is right. I've never actually said it quite that way, but yeah, that's awesome. Let me just share. There we go.
Thank you.
Cool, thank you, and thanks, Ken, as well. Can people see my screen? Okay. Always best to check. I think we're good.
We can see it. Perfect.
Lovely. All right. So, sort of as echoing what Ken said, welcome everyone from across the world again. This is the second month in a row that we've done this virtually, and it's great seeing faces and folks from all around the globe. So, I'm kind of lucky this month presenting the What's New in Power BI. Last month for May, our meetup was just a couple of days after the May release. So I touched very briefly on some of the May features, but I mainly focused on April. And so this month, I'm going to try and cram as much May and June into sort of 15 minutes as I can. But just before I get started, a little bit about me. My name's Joseph Yeates. I've recently started presenting these What's New in Power BI at the monthly Vancouver Power BI meetup groups. I presented a few times, sort of the feature session before as well. I'm a data analyst based in Vancouver, in North Vancouver. And within my role, I model, manipulate, visualize, transform data using Excel, SQL Server, Power BI, of course, and R as well. And my passion is really integrating R into the Microsoft BI stack and trying to make some more advanced analytics a little bit more accessible for users across an organization. So some of my social media details are up on the slide here, and my blog and website as well, feathersanalytics.com. I have actually 2 blog posts that sort of go along and supplement the presentation today, the what's new in May and June, and pretty much every month that there's new features, I'll throw a post up about that as well. So please feel free to connect. I love talking data and anything, you know, sort of geeky with anyone who is interested and will bear with me. So with that, let's jump in here. Oh, wrong. There we go. So as always, I'm going to review as many features as I can, but there are blog posts from Microsoft that covers the full feature release every month. So we have one for May here, and we had quite a lot of features, and one for June as well. For my blog, feathersanalytics.com, if you want to go there, you can go to blog, and here we go. Oh, it has to be slow. And then we have June and May as well. You can look at those posts to see some of the material I'm covering today as well. So with that, let's jump into Power BI. So this is my example report that I also used last month. And the first feature that I'd like to show is the new ability to add drop shadow to your visual. So starting off with a feature that has to do with data visualization. So if I just click on a visual here, my nice area chart, and I go to visualizations, if I go to the format pane on the visualizations tab on the side, down here, there's a new shadow section. I've been reading some of the old James Bond books, so I saw shadow and I started thinking, ooh, shadow governments and secret spy stuff, but still is thrilling. And if I scroll down, you now have the option to add a colored shadow and set its position around the visuals as well. So I'm going to set mine to a nice bright pink. We'll leave the shadow on the outside, and we'll change that to the bottom left. And if we look at our visual now, we can see we sort of have this subtle pink outline around the edge, sort of the bottom left-hand corner of our visual. And I really like this because it's able to add some depth to our dashboard. And so you're not sort of just faced with these two-dimensional rectangles, I guess, containing all your visuals. And that white space between your visuals can now sort of be filled in with something a little bit softer. And I think this really helps the visuals pop out as well, making it a little bit of an easier viewing experience for your report readers. The second update, second feature update that I liked from this month is when you're connecting to data from the web. So I think both Ken and I have looked at this before, a list of Premier League stadiums. So for anyone interested, the Premier League just came back this week. The first games after the COVID pandemic were on Wednesday, yesterday. So it's nice to have soccer back in my life. And something I might want to bring into the report is the location of all the stadiums of English Premier League teams. So I go to my old friend Wikipedia, and we can see we have a lovely table here with some of the information that I need. And if I control copy, and I want to go get data again from the web. This should be fairly familiar to anyone who's used Power BI and you have got data from the web. This is all sort of as it's been. You just have to paste the URL in the dialog box there, hit OK. But what has changed now, which I think is really nice, is the default behavior within this first pane has changed a little bit. Now by default, you have, I'm just going to wait for it to load in this navigator pane here. By default, we see HTML tables that we can connect to, but also suggested tables. So if I click into the HTML tables, this is something that has been available previously as well. So we can sort of see the list of stadiums, just like we saw on the web page, the club, the location, and so forth. We always have the ability to toggle to the web view as well. And down here, suggested tables. So we can look to see like table 4, table 5, table 6. And then we can start to get richer information from that online page a lot quicker. We don't have to go in ourselves. And if none of these return exactly what we want, we can also use the add table using examples. This functionality came out about 2 years ago, I think, and this is really cool as well. So if I wanted to return, what is return on the standard ones, hit transform data, and then that will just load straight into our Power Query editor if we want to start manipulating that and load it into our data model. But for now, I'm just going to disable that, and we'll close and load. So one of the other ones from the May release that I really liked was another custom visual from XViz, which is their bubble chart. So I already have it loaded. If you want to load visuals, you can click on the little ellipsis here, get more visuals from the visualizations pane. And I want to get more visuals. Oh, sorry. I want to, let's skip over that. Where's the marketplace? I think I'm missing something here. There we go. It just took a while to load. So if I want to type in XViz, they're usually featured in all the monthly releases. They release cool visuals that can help supplement some of the out-of-the-box visuals available in Power BI. And if I search that down here near the bottom, it's one of the new ones, is the packed bubble chart. I already have that loaded in my report, but that's how you can load it if you want to find it. So I'm going to click on the packed bubble chart here. Oh, it's being a little laggy today. I'm going to make this a little bit bigger so we can all see it a little bit easier. And here we go. So I just need to drop. Oh boy. Let's get this up and running again. There we go. I think I need to get that new internet that you were talking about there, Ken.
It definitely helps, man. Definitely helps.
I know. Here we go. Just wait, it should be open in a few seconds. While we're doing that, actually, why don't I jump into powerbi.com, and I'm going to actually show one of the new visualization features from the June release. So this is one of the first ones from June that I like. I'm just going to go in here. I'm going to create a new report off of a data set I have in my workspace. I'm just going to create a line chart, and with some of my data here. Oh, actually, that's the wrong data set. Ooh, don't save. Sorry, off of my June 2020 data set, I'm just going to create a report. I'm going to create a line chart, and all I'm going to drop in is my series on the axes, and I'm going to drop the value in the values. So again, up until this point, it's all sort of existing functionality. One thing we're able to do now, which is a little bit different, is if, again, I go to the Format tab on the Visualizations pane, under Data Colors now, we have this ability to show all, and we can toggle that off and on. Previously, we only really had one color, which was the color of the line in our line chart, or multiple colors if we had multiple lines. Now we can actually go and set colors for individual points in our series. So if I look at number 3 on my series, if I want to change that one to pink to sort of make that pop out a little bit, and maybe to the other top one too, number 6, I can now make those pink, and these individual points can pop out too. And if I want to change a low one, say number 4 to light yellow, it gives us a little bit more control over exactly how we want our line chart to look. And I think this could be really useful. Again, if this is sort of a static-ish visual or something that doesn't change very much, and we really want to add some sort of annotation or call out a specific point, now we have the ability to do that. I'm just going to go back to my Power BI. Here we go. And I'm going to continue building my bubble chart, which should be okay again. If this crashes again, we may be out of luck for today. Okay. So now I can drop in 2 fields from my data model. I'm going to drop in position into my legend field, web name into my category, and we'll put, where are we going to do total points into my value. And we can see we have this sort of bubble chart. I've not done any formatting to this yet. This is sort of the default behavior. Anyone who's used Tableau before, this is really similar to one of their out-of-the-box visuals that back when I was using Tableau a bit more frequently, I used a lot. One of the formatting options, and there's plenty with XViz visuals, one of the ones I really like is if you go to chart options in the formats and hit cluster mode to be on. So this clusters all of the categories within the legend that you've selected. And if I increase my cluster size from 5 up to a higher number, we'll say 20. Now we can start seeing a lot of our data points all grouped together. So I really like this one. This is sort of a cool visual, which is good when you're dealing with maybe a small number of groups of data and a larger number of categories, but you sort of want to see a comparison between these high-level groups. I really like this one. Let me get this error message out the way. Yeah, remove them. Why do we ever need recovered files? Also in June, there was the general availability release of a lot of existing features that were previously in preview. So one of these is the hierarchy slicer. So right now, I'm just have my slicer visual, and I've dropped 2 fields in here. I have my price grouping for the players that are in this visual, as well as their position. So if I click high there, from the drop down, I can also sort of drill in and only select certain positions from within there. This is really just like Excel if you use any filtering in Excel pivot tables and you have multiple columns on like your rows or multiple data points in your rows. Really similar to this, sort of these nested hierarchies for slicers. This is now generally available. Previously, it was just in preview. Another feature that's generally available now is the modern ribbon. So I'm just going to expand that a little bit. And we can see the ribbon changed probably 6 months or so ago now. It's now transform data instead of edit queries. And some of these other tabs on the ribbon are group things together a little bit more intuitively. When you navigate to different views on your report, if you go from the report view to the data view, now you have table tools pops up, and some of these tabs on the ribbon that you that may be available in the report aren't really applicable to the data view now, don't show up. And same thing for the model view here. A lot more intuitive experience and just really easier when you're building your reports out. The last thing that's been released for general availability is AI insights in the Power Query editor. So if you have premium capacity, you can link to either custom Azure machine learning algorithms or some of the out-of-the-box algorithms. These are available on the Home tab in the Power Query editor, or the Home tab on the ribbon, right on the very right, these AI insights section. This is some really cool functionality as well. Again, some right out of the box, some you can build yourself, and this is generally available. No need for it to enable it in preview anymore. So with that, that was me. That's what I have for this month. I'm really excited to see what Ken's going to talk about his new monkey tools. I've seen a little bit of it. Looking forward to the presentation. And so with that, Ken, I'm going to hand it over to you.
All right, cool. I will take the screen over then. Grab that one. Thanks for the roundup on that stuff. And before I go too much further, Teams just minimized itself completely on me, so I'm going to try and pull that back up just in case anybody does have a question as I'm going through this and wants to throw it into the chat. Yes. I am going to try and monitor that as we go along as well.
So Christian had a question, and if Joseph would like to address about speaking of Tableau, does anybody know a Power BI theme with Tableau colors preset? I don't. Do you know, Joseph?
Sorry, I'm just looking at the question. Does anyone know a Power BI theme with Tableau colors preset? I don't know off the top of my head. I would have to dig to see if someone's created it, but I'm sure that you'd be able to create that sort of custom theme as well.
In Power BI, you can create now custom themes, so I'm sure. Yeah.
Christian, you're not trying to pull a fast one on someone and actually like give them Power BI and make them think it's Tableau, are you? That wouldn't be kind. Awesome. There you go. Okay, so I'm going to take over now, and we'll go through and talk a little bit about Monkey Tools. I'm really pleased to see so many people here, and I know a bunch of you already, and there's some names that I don't know, so hopefully we'll be able to show you something cool here. I think a lot of you already know who I am, but I'm just going to go through and do a real quick introduction to me for those of you who don't. I am an FCPA, FCMA. I'm a fully designated accountant in Canada that's been awarded a fellowship by my society to thank or recognize me for the work that I've been doing to try and advance the accounting professions by teaching them about how to use proper data tools the proper ways. I run a little website called excelguru.ca that you may have heard of. We have a website, a blog, and a forum on that. So that's one of the things that I do. I'm also founding partner of a new project that we have called skillwave.training. If you're familiar with the Power Query Academy, we have just recently, actually myself and Miguel Escobar have brought Matt Allington in as a partner on this project and rebranded to skillwave.training. We just actually released last week, we announced a new dimensional modeling course that we're doing. Matt's got a supercharged Power BI hybrid online and live course that he just announced this week. We're pushing content into this. This is where we want this to be the central place for where people learn proper business intelligence for self-service BI solutions. So this is something we're working really hard on right now. It's kind of an odd thing to do, I think, when we get into a big lockdown from COVID and our response is to go and sort of start off a new company, but what the heck, why not, right? So I am a Microsoft MVP, have been since 2006 across various categories, including Excel and data platform, which looked after Power BI. I'm now back in something called Office Apps and Services, which looks after all of the Office apps. So I've been playing around in this data space. My three favorite programs that I use almost every single day are Excel, Power BI, and PowerPoint. I love to pull all these things together and whatnot. So I'm also a software developer and an author. Software developer is obviously the topic of what we're going to cover today. I've actually written a couple of books. This is the only one I really like to talk about, is M is for Data Monkey, which is recognized as the book on Power Query out there as well. What we're going to be focusing on today specifically is Monkey Tools, which is an add-in for Excel for BI modelers. But before we do that, I just want to talk a little bit about my modeling philosophy and why the tool is targeted where it actually is. So for me, when I go to start a new project on business intelligence or some kind of an analysis, specifically for analysis-focused jobs, I start in Excel, always. I don't go to Power BI Desktop. I love Power BI Desktop. It's a great product, but for me, my home is always Excel. What I'll do is I'll build my model in Excel. I'll then publish that directly to Power BI. So in Excel, if you're on Excel 2019 and higher, I believe you can publish directly from Excel into Power BI, and it essentially creates the Power BI model in the service that can be scheduled for a refresh, and then you can build more reports in the online portal and share them with people. This is basically what you could look at as me saying, hey, Excel is my version of Power BI Desktop. I start there, publish to Power BI, and build what I need online. The reason why I do this is because I get all of the unstructured benefit that Excel has been known for over the years that used to drive IT crazy, but made Excel the Swiss Army knife of business intelligence. Everything that was good, I still have access to. I also get all of the benefits of the structured modeling tools in Power Query and Power Pivot to start building tabular models as well. So I get that too. Yes, my DAX is not quite as up to date as what's in Power BI Desktop, but to be honest with you, I can work around that most of the time if I need to. I get the interactive reports of Power BI because I can publish to the service and build those. I get the ability to set up scheduled refresh for my Excel models, providing that the data sources are all set up online. I have stuff that I've built in Excel that's scheduled to refresh in Power BI without ever going through Power BI Desktop at all. So that works out well for me as well. And then the biggest thing, of course, is that I also get all of the sharing, control, and security that comes with Power BI that Excel never had in its days of Wild West ecosystem. There are times, however, when I'm going to go and do a very much reporting-focused job. In those, let's face it, Excel's visual stack is kind of lacking compared to what Power BI has. So I might do this. I'll start in Excel still, and then I'll import the model into Power BI Desktop, build some reports, and then publish that to PowerBI.com. This now gives me the ability to take what I've built in Excel, reuse it somewhere else, and build more complicated visuals maybe than I can do in the online service. So to me, this is kind of the best of all worlds scenario that I actually have here, is that I can actually play around with all kinds of different things and really work the way I want to work. It's unusual for me to go and jump straight into Power BI Desktop. I always go Excel first. Part of it's my history. Part of it's because the jobs I do require ad hoc modeling of data, which Power BI isn't as strong at as what Excel is. But then visuals, obviously Power BI kicks Excel's butt in that area. Now, this is my philosophy at work. I know a lot of people who turn around and say, look, I do 90% of everything in Power BI. I've left Excel behind and whatever else. You know what? That's great. And if that's the case, I'm going to be completely honest with you. My tool may not be for you. And I don't want you buying it if it's not going to be. That's basically the way it goes. My target audience is people who model in Excel first with Power Query and Power Pivot. This is what the tools are aimed to actually go and help people with. There also another target audience area that I deal with is people who receive models from other people and need to audit them and figure out what's actually happened in them. Again, I'm not against Power BI at all. I love the program, but I am very much a build in Excel, publish to Power BI kind of person. And that's what the tool set is really built to deal with. The other side of this that makes this possible for me is that Excel has an extremely rich extensibility model for actually building software to get right inside and build the tools right where I work. Power BI does not, unfortunately. There's not really an extensibility model beyond an XMLA endpoint, which still has some challenges about being able to make live changes to what I need for different things. The pricing model I have for my tool, I am committed to providing a forever free version for what I actually have for Monkey Tools. So when I'm actually building all this stuff, one of the first things that we do think about is this something we're going to release to everybody so that they can have all the time? I'm a community guy. I like to support community, and I want you to be able to use good software for what's going on. This is intended to make your life easier. We definitely have features that we put in and say, we're going to make sure this actually stays free forever, no matter what happens. We also have a pro version with a free trial license along the way as well. You get a true 2-week trial license on the pro features, and then it will revert back to the free so you can continue with the forever free, which, by the way, gets new features, gets bug fixes, gets updates. Even in free, we want to make sure that you're using a good version of what's going on. On the other hand, if you pay us for a pro license, well, at that point, then we give you the best of what we got. So we'll actually remove some of the features from the pro side of things. There's only one piece that isn't fully active in the pro trial license, and that is something around our model sleuth reports. We believe that there are some serious value in those, so I'll show you some of those reports a little bit later on. If you're in the pro license, we actually eat every other line of the report, but if you're in the trial license rather, the free license doesn't have access to those at all, but the pro license has access to the full-blown thing as well. And I'll call these things out a little bit, or if anybody's got any questions on that, they can throw it into the chat as we're going along. But for the most part, what you'll see you have access to right away in the trial licenses, and I can call out where things are a little bit different in the free as well. The full details of all of the features, as well as some write-ups of them, are available on my website at excelguru.ca/monkeytools. You can either go through the full URL or the short URL here. If you put Monkey Tools on the end, it'll take you right to the page that gives you all the pricing options, all the feature comparisons, and some documentation links and whatnot as well. Now, when you actually install Monkey Tools, what we do is we actually put a ribbon right inside your Excel interface. This is one of the things that I really wanted to do, is bring the tools close to where we actually work. I don't want to be in an external program. I want my stuff right in the tool set that I'm using. We categorize our tools in 2 basic feature sets. We have convenience features. What a convenience feature is, these are native Excel controls that have been pulled onto one ribbon. The Excel ribbon is set up to group controls that are similar together. It is not at all designed to work through your workflow. What that means is you do Power Query, you're over on one tab. You do Power Pivot, you're on another tab. You want a chart, you're on another tab. What I'm trying to do with this is actually bring the commands that you use for your data modeling job so that you don't have to flip back and forth on ribbons all the time. I want to try and keep everything in one place. So all of those controls, they're just Microsoft standard ones, but they're for convenience purposes. The Monkey Tools features are everything else, and these are the ones that we've actually gone and built to try and add value to make your life easier when we actually start working with our individual models or building our solutions. My entire goal with this, it honestly started with building software to make my life easier because I'm lazy. I mean, efficient. That's the word. I keep on getting that wrong. But it's about building better models faster and being able to actually look at what we have and figure out what's actually there and if we can improve it. So that's the goal here. This is a user-built tool to solve user problems. And I'm really proud of what we've actually put into this, and I hope you like what you see here. So that's the overview. Let's go in and take a look at some demos on these things here. I'm actually just going to close off this Power BI model because that's going to mess up my demo if I leave that open. So we'll get rid of that one. And what I'm going to start with is I'm going to start here with a completely blank workbook. There's absolutely nothing in this at all. For those of you who've actually read Emma's for DataMonkey, you'll know that in about, I think it's chapter 23 or chapter 24, I have a really cool little technique that I put together in that book, which was about inserting a parameter table in Excel and inserting a function called fngetParameter that allows us to retrieve values from an Excel table and use them in Power Query. The problem was you would either have to write a lot of code or you'd have to find the script and download it, and then you've got to open it up every time and copy and paste it. And like I said, that's way too much work for me. So I spent a huge amount of time programming it so that I could just do this, click a button, and at that point, boom, it's going to add a new worksheet, and it also goes and injects the query right in place at this point. If the workbook has already been saved with a file name, that name will be showing right here. It is dynamic, and at that point, I could go and modify any of my existing queries using the instructions in the documentation in order to actually make it dynamic. So that was one of the first things that we actually built. What I'm going to do right now, though, is I'm just going to toss this, and I'm going to reopen Excel here, again, completely from scratch. And I want to show you another feature that we've actually built. That inject parameter, by the way, that's a forever free feature. When you look at what we actually have here, parameter table and function, smart folder, those will always be 100% free. The deal is with these guys, you've got to hook them into your model. So I'll build it for you, but you have to go and actually implement it and actually make the changes in the rest of the code. Now, we give you free documentation for that. There's actually about a 70-page user guide that you can download right from here that'll show you how. But as I say, it's a help, but not a do everything for you. I want to show you this one here. So what I'm going to do first is I'm just going to go and I'm going to save this workbook. So you've seen it's blank. I'm going to go with a save as, and I'm going to go browse. And we'll just go down to save this right here in Monkey Tools add-ins, demos. I'm going to replace this one here called Smart Folder Live. We'll say save. Yes, it exists. I'll replace it. And at this point, it's now saved a blank workbook over top of the old one. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to insert this new Smart Folder query. What will happen is it will pop up a little list here and it says, what would you like to call this new query? So the idea that I'm going after here is I'm trying to build a query that goes from file from folder. The challenge is that when you do that, the folder, when you use a from files from folder, it has to be a local path on your computer. If you need to pull it from SharePoint because it's stored in an Office 365 folder, which this one happens to be, it gives you a web path. And you can no longer use the folder or from files from folder connector. You have to use the from SharePoint connector. And this messes up a lot of people. I'm going to go and say OK on this. And what you'll see is that it creates me a nice new query that's got a little exclamation mark, needs some attention. So I'm going to go double click and just modify this guy here. At least I'm going to try and double click and modify it. Apparently I needed to triple click this time. It's asking me for information about data privacy. So I need to say continue, and I need to actually tell it that my current workbook is, in my case, organizational. Why organizational? Because I've already defined my SharePoint site as an organizational source of data, and these two things must match. I could turn off privacy, but I want to actually show that this works with privacy settings set up. It's now gone and pulled from the SharePoint site right here all of the files that are in that folder. What's really important about this is that you cannot go directly to the root folder that you, or the folder that you're actually looking for. You have to go to the root of the SharePoint site and filter all the way down. I do that in the Smart Folder query for you, so you don't have to worry about it. I'm going to grab 3 of these guys, right click, remove other columns. And at this point in time, I'm actually going to do one more thing with it. I'm not happy with what I've done here. I want to split this into a different query. So let me just back this off for a second. Source is where I wanted. I'm going to actually make a new query. I'm going to call this one files. I'm going to go right click and reference. This is a best practice to separate these two pieces. We're going to go files, give it a new name, wait for it to update, which is always a little bit frustrating. and then we'll go right click. Now we'll remove other files. There we go. That's better. So this is just a listing of the files that are sitting in this SharePoint folder. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to say close and load to. I'm going to load this to a table. I'm going to drop it on an existing worksheet, and I'm going to drop it right here and say OK. Power Query will go and grab this data. You can see it's pulling from SharePoint. It lands it inside the worksheet. Everything's good. I'm now going to say save and file, close. Now, at this point, what I'd like to do is I'd like to actually go and I'm just going to pull up the folder that actually shows these things. And here it is, Smart Folder Live. It is syncing because this is a folder that is synced through OneDrive back to my SharePoint site. It's now completed. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to right click on my little blue cloud over here. I'm going to go to pause syncing. I'm going to pause this for 2 hours. All right. Now we're going to double click on this and open this right from Windows. It's going to reopen this file inside Windows and look at the file path. This is a major problem for a lot of people because I built that last one using a SharePoint connector. This needs a different connector, so most of the time this comes back with an error. It won't refresh. So you're constantly toggling the, okay, do I want to sync? Do I not want to sync, depending on how I did this? Well, here's the really cool thing about this. I'm going to show the queries and connections. You can see we've still got it here. I'm just going to go hit the refresh all button. You can see that it's now loading. Instead of pulling from SharePoint, it's now just refreshed this from this local path, which is beautiful. I can tell that that happened because this little file with the tilde here, this is a temp file. It is a temp file for the one that I'm actually in. That doesn't happen with SharePoint. It only happens from the local folder. And the nice thing about this is that it avoids all the formula firewall issues and everything else. You can publish this to Power BI and schedule a refresh. However, it does require a data gateway because it recognizes the local folder as something that it can actually pull from. So it sees that folder.files and says, oh, you need a gateway to refresh that, even if it's doing it from online. So that's a bit of an unfortunate piece, but at the same time, this is a really, really useful thing, particularly if you're cooking up demos and sometimes you're online and syncing and sometimes you're not. This smart switches back and forth and works really well for it. So this one is a pro feature, works on the free trial. So you can actually inject it when it's on the free trial, and when your free trial runs out, it'll still work. That's no problem. But it is one of our pro features that we think is useful to people that we've set up that way. So that's one of the features that we're going to work with here. I'm just going to throw this guy away now, and we're going to go and take a look at some of the others. I'm going to jump into this QueryMonkey-based model. One of the things I didn't actually mention when I was first looking at my ribbon with our different features is we've broken our features up into two different types of features. We have things called monkeys. There's only one of these on the ribbon right now. I mean, there's a picture of one on the right-hand side, but the query monkey is the monkey goes and injects new queries into your workbook. Everything else is labeled as a sleuth, which is an English term for a detective. So you'll see Destination Sleuth, Query Sleuth, Pivot Sleuth, DAX Sleuth. All of these guys along the way are built for interrogating different things and finding out stuff around your models. What I have here, I've got 3 different data tables. I'll just show you what this actually looks like inside the Power Pivot window itself. So if I pop open Power Pivots, we'll jump into the diagram view. And you can see that I've got a sales and budget table and I've got a categories table. But what I don't have here is I don't have a calendar table, which I desperately need. And the problem is because all this data is sourced from worksheets, my IT department hasn't given me access to a server where I can pull my calendar. I now have to work this out on my own. I've seen a variety of people come up with building tables in Excel for doing all this kind of work, but the problem is they're not dynamic. They don't update. So for that reason, we built our dynamic calendar creator. Now, inside here, we have the ability to go from 12 months to 445s, picking your own custom year ends, 13 fiscal months. I also have the ability to change the calendar name, where I want to load it to. Why I'd want to load it to the data model or not into the data model, I have no idea. Optionally, you can trim the calendar. I don't recommend you do this, but it's there because some people like to. What I need to do here is make the decision over what column will have my earliest ever date in it. That's going to be for my sales table because I'm always selling stuff. The column name is called date. We actually check for the date type columns and actually give you those as an upfront option. I'm going to pull my latest date from budget because I usually budget before sales happen. I've worked for an organization where that didn't happen, but regardless, most people generally budget before sales happen. What I'm going to do now, I'm going to click Create, and it's going to go and create me 3 different queries. It creates me a start date and an end date. This is going to be the earliest date in my data. This is the latest date in my data, and then it will actually build a calendar that spans every single day with a granularity of 1 level all the way through the entire thing. Once it's done, it comes up and says, hey, we created your calendar here for you, but while we've also gone and related all the fields, we do need you to do a little bit of work on this. So let's go OK. We'll jump into Manage Data Model, take a look at Diagram View, and you'll notice that I've actually created the relationships between the tables as well. This is brand new. We actually just pushed a publish on this about an hour ago that actually creates the relationships between these tables when they go in. What I can't do, unfortunately, because Excel's object model doesn't give me the ability to do it, something that drives me crazy, I can't do this. Right-click, hide from client tools. Right-click, hide from client tools. And that's what that message previously was about, is hiding the foreign keys in the relationship so that things don't accidentally get used by your users. So I'm just going to go and click OK on this. One of the other things that I want to fix, though, is this. In my calendar, it looks awesome, but it's only a single column. Naturally, there's some other things that we actually want to work with. So I'm going to grab date here, and I'm going to go add column. I'm going to go add a year. There we are. And then I'm going to jump in. I'm going to add a couple more columns as well. We're going to go and grab month. We'll add a month number. We need that to sort our month names. So we'll go date, add month, and we'll choose to add the name of month as well. I don't really like these long ones though, so I'm going to go to transform, extract first characters, and I'm going to extract the first 3 characters. Now, this is work that I do regularly, and like I said before, one of my sort of philosophies around working with this kind of stuff is I want to try and find tools that make people's lives easier. Every time I build a calendar, I'm coming in and adding columns. 2 hours ago, Abdullah, who's our programmer here, he's actually on the call watching what's going on with this stuff as well. 2 hours ago, Abdullah and I were actually working through designing what we actually want our user interface to be so that this kind of stuff, you can actually just check the boxes all the way along to say, I want these columns. So when you're creating the calendar, it actually creates those right off and relates it to the data model so you don't have to think about it except for going in and actually making those changes to the data model structure. And at this point now, if I jump into my data model, I go and take a look at my diagram view, you'll notice we've got a lot more calendar columns ready to go. So we're trying to add some new pieces to, again, to make this life a little bit easier. Now I want to build a pivot table, but there is one more thing that I need. Personally, if I were going to build this up, generally, I'll put my measures on my sales and my budgets table, but I know a lot of people that like to put measures on individual measures table. So we added this, add measure table. It asks you what you want to call your measure table. You'll notice it prefaces it with an underscore. The reason for this, Excel cannot have a table called measures. That's a reserved word. But at this point, I've now just added a new measures table directly into my data model. Again, it comes back and says, listen, to turn it into an official measure table, you need to do a little bit of work. We need to go and hide the only column on this table to make it work properly. It'll still work if you don't do this, but it works better if you do. Right-click, hide from client tools so that there's no visible columns on it. This will make a little bit more sense when we get into talking about Pivot Sleuth. I'm now going to come over here and I'm going to say, all right, let's go to Power Pivot. We're going to go to Measures, Manage Measures. I would love to get this Manage Measures button on my ribbon, but unfortunately that turns out to be a really challenging thing. And, you know, away you go, right? It's one of those things, again, that Microsoft doesn't give us easy access to do. So one day we'll reinvent the wheel and build our own version of it. But for right now, we're sticking with that's one place that you got to pop back and forth. So this one here, I'll build a nice little measure for my sales dollars and store it on my measure table. I'm going to build 2 more measures as well, budget dollars. So this one's going to be the sum of my budget amount. I should also mention Power BI has a really cool feature called Quick Measures. One of the things that I actually find lacking in the Power BI Quick Measures is that there are no easy measures in Quick Measures. They are all built for more complicated things. One of the things that I would like to solve in the future is actually build a collection of quick measures for Excel as well, and have those right on the ribbon too, so that you can actually go and inject these things really quickly and easily, working with both simple ones rather than dragging columns and whatnot onto your pivot table, as well as potentially some more complicated patterns. I don't know when we'll get there, but it is one of the things that's on my to-do list. So now go create myself a nice little pivot table. I'm going to throw my measures on here, sales, budget, and variance. And then maybe I'll go and say, I don't know, let's go and throw my categories. We can go and throw class on my rows, and I could put my, you know what else I'm going to do? I'm going to move this one down here. We'll switch that up so it looks a little bit different. And then maybe I'll go and put the month name on columns. And I realized that I didn't actually sort that in alphabetical order. I could always go back and do that. I'm not going to take care of that right now. I wish I could actually auto-apply sorting programmatically as well, but again, there's a real lack of programmability around the Excel object model. We've done a huge amount of investment to be able to pull information that Excel just can't see, but trying to actually write some of this back is a little bit challenging. So I keep talking to Microsoft about giving me those options, but regardless, hopefully you'll see a nice quick injection of measure tables, quick injection of calendar tables is hopefully an interesting feature for you along the way that you'd like to see. Again, all of the items that are underneath the Query Monkey section here under Inject Queries, where we're doing the full job, these ones do require a pro license longer term, but they do work in the trial and they will stick around. They're not license bound by any way. All right, so next one, I'm just going to close this one off and we're going to jump into another feature I'm going to show you called Destination Sleuth. So this is the next piece that we're working across our ribbon here. We've been injecting queries. We're now going to start looking at what's actually going on inside here. So I have a few different data tables, but I have a little more going on too. If I click on Destination Sleuth, it actually tells you that I have a whole bunch of queries going on inside this file. I want to show you why we actually built this. I'm going to click the Show Queries and Connections. This little pane on the right-hand side is awesome, but categories. 4 rows loaded. To where? To data model, maybe. If you hover it over, you can see it. With Destination Sleuth, we can tell you exactly where these things are loaded. I could go and say, hey, you know what? I want to change this one here to load to a table. If I do this, it will now go and change the load destination to load to a table. Now, I don't know how many people have done this where you've created something and you really wish that the worksheet was named after the query. You can do that too by clicking Name Sheets After Queries, select this, update the sheet name, and it will automatically update it to the sheet name for you. So you don't have to go back and manually rename every one. And we'll actually work with a collection of these as well. I'm going to set this back to connection only, but I'm also going to delete the host worksheet. I don't really want to have that one there. So we'll go with Load Destinations. And it says, hey, we're going to take this away. Sure, no problem. So not only will it actually, oops, I guess I should probably select the query I want to do. Load Destinations, there we go, that's better. And at this point, it removes both the worksheet and sets it back to a connection-only query for me automatically. You think, okay, I could do all that through the user interface. It might be a little bit slower. Sure, but here's the deal. This is where I think this actually starts to become really, really useful. When I built the queries that you see here, what I did was I hopped in and I built all of these and all of these in one instance of Power Query. In Excel, when you go to actually choose your load destinations, you get to pick one load destination. The problem is, I want these guys all loaded to the data model and these all loaded as connection only. In Power BI, this is easy. You just right click and say, I don't want to enable load on the individual ones you don't want. But in Excel, we can't do that. So instead, I load everything to connection only. And then typically what you'd have to do is you have to go right click, load to, change the load destination, wait, right click, load to. Not anymore. Now we go grab these 3 queries or these bunch of queries. I want to load them all to the data model, update the load destinations, and what you'll see is that it's going to go through and start actually changing each of these individual ones, loading them down the bottom here. One thing that does drive me a little bit nuts, and again, a feature that I unfortunately cannot change, I have no ability to actually put these back in the correct folder. This drives me crazy. This is a missing object inside the object model. As I said, Excel's littered with these problems. So when I go back and recreate the queries, they actually show up in the bottom and you have to manually move them back yourself. That's a bit of a bummer. But at the same time, the fact that I can actually quickly go and select multiple load destinations and change them all at once, they are just about done. I'm just waiting for the last query to load. And at that point, boom, it's finished. I don't have to go back and right-click, wait, right-click, wait. Select them all, right-click, walk down the hallway to get a coffee, come back, and it's already done. So a little bit more user-friendly, a little bit easier. So that's Destination Sleuth Part 1. we're going to see it again before we're done here. So I'm just going to jump in, and I'm going to move across to another little guy here called Time Sleuth. And Abdullah and I were chatting about this one earlier, and the questions that we get, Abdullah says, boy, I notice a lot of people seem to like this. This comes up oftentimes. And I think a lot of this has to do with the fact that Power Query in Excel doesn't really have a good way of actually measuring query performance. We build a lot of queries, and then we hit the refresh button, and we wait, and we wait, and we wait, but we don't know what's taking time. I want to show you two things here. Query Sleuth is the first thing that we're going to be going on. So when I go and open this up, this is our custom M interface. If you want to take a look at a query, you can click on something like buffered here, and you'll notice that it's actually giving me a block of code that's all nicely colorified, and by default, it also shows like this indented. So we have a Power Query indenter built right into our tables. When this reverts to a free license, you lose the ability to toggle some of these pieces, but we always show you your code in indented format because we believe that indented looks nicer. We don't show you the color on it though, so keep that in mind. On the left-hand side, you'll notice that we actually highlight the load destinations again. If this one here, UI-driven compound, is actually loading to both the table and the data model. All these yellow ones are connection only. Green ones go to the data model, blue ones go to tables. You'll notice there's a little plus beside it. If I double click on it, this is your Power Query dependency tracer right here as well. So you can say, hey, buffered, lookup table in yellow, references lookup table here. That's the orange table you see back here, by the way. Data is the blue table that you see over here. PQV lookup is a custom function, which comes from M is for DataMonkey, and indented, it looks like this. The whole point of this file, by the way, is to convince you to never, ever use the PQV lookup function from my book. Because what we discovered is that the UI-driven method, which means driven by the user interface by clicking buttons, as you'll see later, is actually significantly faster. We learned that after we published. We did more techniques and more learning and found new things. So there you go. What I want to call out here is the difference between the buffered query here, where you can see a table.buffer. By the way, this code is fully editable, and you can actually click update to write it back to Power Query if you want as well. The difference between this one with the table.buffer and unbuffered doesn't have table.buffer. That's the only difference between these two things here. The query dependency chain is the same, as you can see in both places. Only difference is to say unbuffered just has lookup table, buffered, we did a table.buffer around it. Let me go and close this and open up the Time Sleuth. The Time Sleuth purpose is to go and actually go and change or do refreshes and compare what's going on. Down the bottom here, I'm going to chart the variation here. I'm going to chart it over 3 trials, which is a minimum to get a good chart. I'm also going to double the amount of trials to compare, does it refresh faster with privacy on or privacy off? And what I'm going to do is I'm going to run buffered versus unbuffered. I'm going to select the two of them and say refresh the selected queries. Now this is going to take about a minute and a half, I think, in order to actually run through and do this. And you'll watch that it's actually going to run some individual trials here a couple of times. There's going to be multiple cycles of this because it's trying it in a buffered state first, or it'll run buffered and unbuffered 3 times, and then it'll turn privacy off and run them 3 times with privacy disabled as well. You can do a detailed refresh all, which will basically run the same operation on every query that you actually have. You don't have to run it over 5 trials. You can run it over 1. Although what I find is that because Power Query is a single-threaded calculation engine, what that means is it is very susceptible on your timings to what else is going on your system. In other words, I'm running right now with a Teams client running. If I wanted to actually time this and get a really good estimate out of this, I would not have Teams running. I would also not be running Spotify, syncing OneDrive, because if anything else collides on that same core that's being used to refresh Power Query, it will have an impact. So if you're trying to, there's actually a lesson in that. If you're trying to actually speed up your Power Query refresh, shut everything down and just let Power Query do its thing. The other thing that I want to show you is what is the big effect on privacy. I will also be really, really clear on this. Power BI has a really cool thing for actually timing. You can run diagnostics on your queries. That will be coming to Excel. I can't wait. I've been in discussions with the Power BI team or the Power Query team on this, because once we get it, we'll actually be able to take this to a much deeper level. Right now, what this is showing is basically the refresh time for your query. What we want to be able to do is say, let's take a look at the individual steps that are impacting. We can't do that quite yet. Once we actually get that ability comes through, then we should be able to actually do that. And it's something we're looking forward to playing around with and showing some cool stuff out of it, like the charts that we're actually going to complete once we're done here. You should also know that we have a standard refresh all. This is basically Excel's refresh all. The standard refresh all, as of Excel 365, will always be faster than running a detailed refresh all. The reason being, we run each individual refresh, which means it takes no advantage of node caching in Power Query. That's a really technical thing, but the standard refresh all always does. The point of what we're looking at here, though, is to get a general idea of what's going on. And what you can see here is that we've quickly created a nice little chart. Now, I also need to go and do something like this. This stuff just makes me sad, but bear with me here. I need to go and add a chart element manually to show a legend on the bottom. This is called an Ivy chart. They were built inside Excel 2016. That's when the box and whisker actually came out. And we're lacking some items in the object model to be able to automatically create your legend for you, which, as I say, just kind of makes me sad. Can the time sleuth run over Power BI, Power Query? No. Unfortunately, I can't kick off a refresh inside Power BI. On the other hand, we are working on a feature to be able to go and say connect to a Power BI model and then import the current model into Excel, so you'd be able to import that query set backwards into Excel and then run the refresh there. So Power BI, you can actually import from Excel to Power BI. You can't go the other way. This is actually one of the primary things that got me started in this whole thing, is I want to solve that, because I actually have Power BI models I need to bring back to Excel. So that's something we're looking at. All right. What do we got? We got a box and whisker chart. The X is the mean or the average refresh time. What you see here is the upper and lower quartile boundaries, and then there's some other things that go on. Our documentation has a full explanation of how this one works and actually links to a great article on it. The key thing I want you to recognize is that the buffering of this makes this significantly faster. So from 30-ish seconds, there's a huge amount of variation here, very little variation in the buffering. That's why the time's also close, and much quicker. So I'm going to drill in on just the buffered. And now what you'll see is that if I have my privacy settings on, it can actually take a lot longer to run. And this always happens, even if your privacy levels are setting, or your privacy settings are set to the same privacy level on all your data. Because Power Query is checking, it has an impact, and sometimes a significant impact, on the actual refresh. So if you know why you should be turning privacy off or keeping it on, this is something you could toggle. If you don't understand the implications of privacy, research it first. It's on for a reason, but it can actually have a big performance impact. Here's a couple of other charts that I actually ran. The interesting piece here, this is the user interface driven query. Now, what I want to show you is if I actually take out the unbuffered query, get rid of that for a second, look at my UI driven one. Look how fast that is. This is just by clicking buttons through the user interface versus writing all the code that I did and buffering it. Almost instant. Almost no variation in that when privacy is off. When privacy is on, we have a small outlier down here, but not much variation. It's relatively consistent. Sometimes this one goes a little bit faster, but the variation is massive, and there's a huge outlier up here. This is only over 5 trials. Think about it over 20. Here's another version of the same chart. This is where we actually also pulled in the UI-driven one that loads to both the table and the data model. Interestingly, on this one, when privacy is off, it's actually pretty quick. When privacy is on, good Lord, look what happens. So I would suggest to never load to both the table and the data model with privacy on. That's not really a good look. So anyway, that's some of the stuff around the timing. As I say, we want to do a lot more investment in this area. We're just waiting on Microsoft to deliver us some cool tools around that. So, but even so, right now, I mean, I'll show you something a little bit later on that's that has had a pretty big impact on some of the models that I've built along the way as well. So. I'm going to show you a couple more things here. Let's go and take a look at Pivot Sleuth. This is one of the features that well, let's be honest, I love all the features that I built, or else I wouldn't have built them. But this one's kind of cool too. Let me show you this. We got a data model. We're going to go and take a look at diagram view right now. So you can see that we have a calendar table. We've got a sales and a budget fact tables here with some measures on them. And we've got a nice little categories table on the right-hand side. Everything looks linked together. This model is in beautiful shape here. No problem whatsoever, except that, here's the source data. When I jump into my pivot table, I get the dreaded relationships between tables may be needed message. Why? And this is always the challenge, is that when people do this, they don't understand, and they go and they click auto detect, and that's a really good way to screw up your model, in my opinion, right? I don't trust that. It does some weird things on occasion. So we built this guy here, Pivot Sleuth. And what Pivot Sleuth does is it opens up and it tells you exactly what is causing the problem. Sales category here. This field has no relationship path to and can't filter budgets. Now, this message will go away, so when you click on it, it'll actually show it all the way down here. There is obviously some technical understanding that you actually need around this kind of thing, but here's the more important part. If I just go back here and click on or look at budget, it says budget can't be filtered by our sales category. What's going on with this one? Why is that the case? What's with sales category? Oh, I've pulled category off of sales here. So this is not the right field to be working with. And it's interesting. I feel like I'm missing something here because I actually pushed through a bug fix on this one to try and fix up a specific problem here. This should also be identifying this for you as a foreign key. I am going to be just moving this off for category, and I'm going to put category on from the categories table, which is where it should have come from, and suddenly the pivot table looks a lot better. And notice the pivot table field list, no more errors. If I go back to Pivot Sleuth, everything's nice and clean. So that's the first one I want to show you here. Now, the other thing that I would also recommend around this one is, in order to prevent yourself from getting into that kind of issue, just as a public service announcement on this, if you go into diagram view and you find your measure tables, if you grab every unaggregated field and hide them, you're going to see a change in the user interface for Excel. Okay, so we're only going to show measures. I want you to look at this. Before I select Excel, notice that budget, calendar, categories, and sales, they're all showing in alphabetical order. When I go close this and come back to Excel, budget and sales pop up the top. They only have measures. Everything else is unhidden or is hidden. Therefore, these are now flagged not only as fact tables, but proper measure tables. These are my dimensions. And down the bottom here, this will now all show correctly. It also means that my users will never put category and class onto the pivot table from the sales field or budget field, causing those kind of issues. So just a little public service announcement, which is something we also cover inside the documentation for this as well. Let me show you another little issue that we can get to with this one here. So I'm going to show you a similar data set here. Data is based on the same data. Here's my data model. I now have a measures table, which was injected by Monkey Tools. Fantastic. Let's go and take a look and see what happens when we jump over to a nice little pivot table over here. I've got a relationship between tables may be needed message. If I go and take a look at the Pivot Sleuth, it says, hey, we have a couple of problems here. Categories, class, and category, there are no relationship paths. They cannot filter the items that are showing up over here. So this one will actually tell me measures is a disconnected table. Your measures are probably calculating okay, but we can't tell for 100%. Right now, if this is intended to be a measure table, flag it by hiding all the unaggregated columns. What Excel sees right now is there's no relationship path between measures and categories, and therefore it's throwing up this error. So if I go back in here, right-click measures and hide from client tools, turn this back into a proper measures table, notice the relationship message goes away, Pivot Sleuth comes up clean, everything's working. So this is, again, something to try and give back some advice as to what's actually going on and show you how these things work. Now, let's take a look at this one. We got another table. No relationship message, everything must be fine. But inside here, we see a couple of other different pieces. Sales category is highlighted in a specific blue. This is telling me that sales category is a foreign key. This is coming from the sales category table here. We shouldn't be using foreign keys. We should be using the primary key from the category field on this side. In addition, we can see budget year over here. Budget year is coming from a fact table. It's showing up from the budgets table here. We don't want to be using fact table fields in dimensional areas. We would prefer to use the year field from calendar over here. So If I go and make some modifications to this, let's get rid of this category and put this category on, and get rid of this year and put the calendar year on our columns. Let's just go slide that right in there. The data is now going to calculate a lot better, and Pivot Sleuth comes up clean. So this whole thing here is to try and help debug some of the issues that are actually going along with this thing. I'm going to show you one more on Pivot Sleuth because this one actually leads into some other demos along the way for me here as well. This one is a little bit more complex model as well. So if I take a look at this, this has got some issues. We can see relationships may be needed here. There's all kinds of problems going on. I'm going to go and slice these off a little bit at a time, but once again, I'll hit it with Pivot Sleuth again to take a look and see what's going on. I actually used this tool myself the other day, actually, because I was trying to figure out why one of the relationships I created wasn't working. I pushed it into here, and I realized that it actually thought that I was using a foreign key instead of a primary key because I'd created my relationship backwards, which is kind of hard to do, but in most cases, in this case, it actually did. So these guys here, we have a foreign key. We have another foreign key as well. So at this point, I could go back and say, all right, those don't look like they belong there, so let's get rid of them. So where am I going to find my foreign key? Item ID, I believe, is going to be on my items table. So I'm just going to go and take a look. I don't see it. The items table must be over here. There it is. So we'll just get rid of items ID here, and we'll bring back item ID onto the table there. I believe it was above location. I've also got hour, which is showing up from an individual field. I should probably mention this too. If you're looking for where is this, when you look at Pivot Sleuth, we don't tell you what hour, it is just hour. No matter what you call what you have in the bottom, like actual in my values area, we tell you the fully qualified field name list for it so you can find it. Oh, that's in the chit headers table. Cool. I'll go look at chit headers, take off hour here, and then I'll go and find shifts and put hour on here. Now, I just dismissed this behind, so let me close that and reload it. My two blue fields are gone. That looks cool. I've got a disconnected table, so that's going to be causing me my problem here, and this one can't be filtered by it. As it turns out, there's no real reason to have this on here anyway, so I'm going to take it off. This will get rid of my relationship message. So what I'm going to do is I'm now going to look at it. Everything looks pretty good. But now I want to see my budgets. So I'll go and open up budget, check the box, slide that onto the pivot table. Boom, we got a problem again. And in this case, there's actually a bunch of things that are causing this particular problem. So once again, as I add things, I can see immediately budgets can't be filtered by item ID, hour, or chit ID. Now, chit ID is this slicer up the top here. If I click on this, it will actually select the slicer for me. So I can now go try and press the delete key, but unfortunately it's not in focus. So I'll go and actually select it and press delete right here. Get rid of that. I don't actually need that. And let me go back to my Monkey Tools piece here. I'm going to close this, reopen Pivot Sleuth again. Now I want to just talk about why these guys are actually a problem. What's actually happening here is there's no relationship path. So if I go and take a look inside the data model to diagram view, the fields that I'm trying to actually use for my filtering is I'm trying to use hour to filter my sales and my budgets. The problem is this is a one-to-many relationship. The only relationship path that can be traced to budgets here are all many-to-one, so they can't go against these arrows, which means there is no filter path to here. I don't budget to the hourly level is essentially what I'm saying. The same with item ID. I can't go against the direction of the arrow in this one-to-many relationship up the category ID to filter this, and therefore I can't filter this particular guy. It's causing me this particular problem. Having said that, Excel and Pivot Sleuth only look at natural relationships. In other words, the physical arrows that have been drawn between them. As of right now, we don't look at virtual relationships like use relationship, cross filter, treat as. But there is a way to suppress this message if your DAX is using those and it's right, which plainly mine's not, but let's pretend that it is. What do? I hide the unaggregated column on budgets. Manage data model. I'm going to turn this guy into a proper measure table. I'm also going to grab these guys here. You'll find in every model that I do, my fact tables, every unaggregated column is always hidden. And at that point, it will convert this to a proper measure table, the relationships between tables dialog will disappear. And when you go back to Pivot Sleuth, it says, yeah, it's clean. Now, we rely on you to write your good DAX in this case. Obviously, we hope that you know what you're doing for that particular case. But even if you didn't know, if you're going, why am I getting all these grand totals, you can always unhide any column from the budgets table, rerun the Pivot Sleuth, and you can see what fields are actually impacting it. So it should help there. Christian, you asked, when you start a model from a flat table, is it best practice to create dimension table for all columns? I remember hearing somewhere that no column from a fact table should be used around rows, columns, slicers, and pivots. It sounds like you came to my class. Wait, you did? I remember this. Yeah, if you're starting with a flat tables are so 1995. That's the way that the standard pivot table worked. I would always carve them up into separate fact and dimension tables. Get your dimensions into dimensions, link them back to the keys, foreign keys on your facts, hide the foreign key, and use the dimensions for your slicing. Put your facts on your fact table is my recommendation. So if that didn't mean anything to you, dimensional modeling course is a really good idea because that will help out in understanding a lot of what we're saying, and as well as understanding a lot of what's going on here. All right. Now, on this one here, I want to show you a couple other features that we actually have inside this particular case. I've got another tool here called DAX Sleuth. DAX Sleuth is my dependency tracer for DAX measures and my indenter for DAX measures and things like that. So first thing I want to show you is over here we have a nice little dependency tree. It's obviously giving us some color highlighting. Anything that's in light yellow is an explicit measure. We've written DAX for this. If we are working with a calculated column, I try to avoid these, but they show up in blue. Implicit measures I will also avoid. They show up in orange. I did get an email back from one of my friends at one point who installed this and says, Ken, your tool says that I've got all kinds of implicit measures. I've looked in the data model, they're not there. And I said, did you turn on the thing to say, to deselect the option to hide implicit measures by default? And he did, and he says, holy cow, I've got 12 implicit measures sitting in here that I thought that I'd removed, because he dragged a field onto the pivot table and then dragged it off. That doesn't delete them. You have to manually delete them, and I like to clean those things up. The big ones, green ones, have children. If I double click on it, you can see that we indent your DAX automatically. No need to go out to a third-party tool to do this. We also show you here is a child object of sales, so you can actually step right into it and see what's going on with this. Now, I'm going to show you my burgers sold all time. It has 3 levels. I also notice that I've got burgers sold here, which has a DAX signature that looks like this. And what I'd really like to do is I'd like to actually flatten this down so I can see everything all at once, the ultimate size of the measure. So I'm going to flatten this. This will take the burgers sold and replace it with the burgers measure. It also wraps it in a calculate, which is important to make sure that the context transition actually works properly. You'll notice that we have sales units here. So I can flatten this down again to see exactly what's going on in this measure if there's any ambiguity going on inside this thing. Should I want to, I could click update. This will write it back into the Power Pivot model. I'm not going to do that. That would be a bit of a mess. If I want to get rid of it, the changes here, I can X or move to another one and go back, and you'll see that it actually shows up right here. Another cool feature that we have, I look at draft. It looks like it's got a good chain here. I really like it, but I want to create canned beer. So I'm going to duplicate it, make a new measure here called canned beer. And at this point, I'm going to say OK. It will go and actually create an exact duplicate of the draft beer measure under the name canned beer. It takes all of the formatting, stores it on the same table, and writes the DAX formula in there. Now I can go and say canned beer. I actually want to update the formula on this one here. Instead of draft, I'll just go and make this canned, update, and I now have a new measure inside my tables for canned beer. If I go and take a look at chit details, you can see right there, there's my canned beer measure, and I can drop that onto a pivot table and away I go. So that's one of the nice little features around our DAX sleuth here. Like the query sleuth, the DAX sleuth can actually be toggled into dependent mode or precedent mode. You can turn all these things off if it's too noisy for you. Personally, I usually look at it in precedent mode. We can group things by table, so if you're putting everything on a measure table because you want to be able to find them, you don't actually need to do that. If you're using our tool, you can actually see them this way. A few different pieces here. We can indent, unindent, and whatnot as well. Now, one of the things I do want to show you, though, I'm really proud of this one too, like everything. This is really cool. On the right-hand side, we also have this little navigator pane. I don't know how many times you've actually tried to figure out where your DAX formulas are being used, but in this case, I show you every pivot table, every chart, every OLAP formula, and named range that it's being used on. And when I click on pivot table 1, it will take me there and select it. So I can navigate through my workbook to go and select the individual elements. There's my chart that's actually been selected now. So a nice little piece there that we can play around with too. Although there's more coming up in this area as well. That's the DAX sleuth. So we're moving away across. I'm now going to move into model sleuth. And what I'm going to do with model sleuth is I'm going to go and run a model summary. This will analyze the model and come back and give me a whole pile of statistics on what's actually happening inside this workbook. I have 9 tables, 9 relationships. Really? Let's go look. You can count them. There's 9 tables with 9 relationships between the tables. If I now drop back, I can see that I've got 20 measures. My workbook is taking 10.8 megs of data in order to actually do its thing, or thereabouts. I have 16 queries in this workbook. 9 of my data sources out of 9 are driven from Power Query. These are all of the relationships. Every one of them is active with the primary and foreign keys. They're all many-to-one relationships. My table summary stats, I have a snowflake table in my model that I've been able to identify. If you know what that means, you know that there's really never a need for a snowflake table inside a data model in Power Pivot or Power BI. And when I talk about snowflake, I'm not talking about star schemas. I'm talking about one level removed from that initial dimension that doesn't link to any other dimensions. I have a disconnected table. I can tell you how many rows are on them, how many columns, where the data source comes from. Is it Power Query, or did somebody go into Power Pivot and connect from database here? I don't like these connections. They're legacy. So I like to be able to identify those quickly. Here's all my column sets. How many unique values? Are the columns hidden? Are they data columns, or are they calculated columns? Because I hunt these things down and shoot them as quickly as I can. Measure stats. Here's all of my measures. Fact tables, explicit or implicit. Are they used? Are they not used? That has implications, as well as the DAX expressions. And here's all of my queries. One of the cool things I can say on this is that my friend Christian from Romania, he was playing around with this tool. He said, hey, Ken, I would really love to be able to actually go and pull these things by Power BI into another piece. Can you turn these into official Excel tables for me? Because they weren't. They were just text. So we said, sure, let's do that. So these are tables. I can add a filter button. And what's kind of interesting about this is that I can look at all of the data sources that are coming in, and I can actually filter it down to say, let's get rid of anything that says query and anything that says blanks, and say, okay, those are the data sources that are actually driving this particular solution. So that's kind of a neat little thing to be able to do with it. This report, only half the data will show up if you're in trial mode. This is a documentation piece that we believe is valuable. This one, you need a full pro mode to get all of the data that's actually inside this one. Another feature under Model Sleuth, again, that is under the same licensing components, we can run you a memory chart right out of your model, so you can see exactly how much memory each column is actually taking inside your data model. How many unique values are there? What is the data type? Because that affects compressions. Is it in use, or is it not in use and actually recoverable? In other words, I could go through the calendar table, and these columns right here could all be removed because they're not being used in any formula, any visual, any relationship, any sorting hierarchy, or anything else. So we can actually trim those out and save ourselves a little bit of space. If you're interested in exactly what can be trimmed out, the unused items report will give you a list of exactly that. All of the natural columns, all of the implicit or explicit measures, queries, everything comes up inside this thing in order to actually show this. So it shows a nice quick summary for how we can actually get rid of some of the information along the way here. What I'm going to do now is I'm actually going to drop out of this particular model, and I'm going to show you what this looks like in a much more complex model. So this is Model Sleuth is coming up for an economic analysis model. This was a massive job that I did for a client where we actually built out a 25-year forecast for 25 sectors of a housing development, and we had this down to the point where you could tell me if you were going to change the depth of fill for a road fill from 6 inches to 9 inches, how much money would that cost us, and we had it estimated out fairly cleanly. The challenge that we had, though, I drew this map manually. This is my query interlinking map to try and figure out what was going on in case my client decided that they wanted to change one of the fundamental cornerstones. Every blue box is a query. Every off-page connector is actually linking to another query. The green boxes are the data model. This was ridiculously complex, and it actually is one of the main reasons why I started investing in building the Query Sleuth. Because, and I'm going to maximize this just for all of your incredible viewing pleasure here, you'll notice there's a lot of queries. This is what drives forecast. There's a lot of queries. Some of them are short. Some of them are not short. And the challenge that I ran into is my client would come back and say, hey, I need to change this. And I said, okay, I'm going to flip to dependency mode. That's going to change this one right here. What does that affect in my model? Okay, it only affects these three. Or this is going to change this one. Oh boy, this one actually affects a lot of things. Now I've got to be a lot more worried. That was actually one of the fundamental pieces that actually drove me to build this tool, because as you can imagine, if you look at this model with this many queries inside the Power Query editor in the view dependency view, which by the way didn't exist when I started this thing, but even when it did actually come out, this model looks like this. It's useless. You can't pull out your individual query. It's way too complicated, so I can't use this thing. So my query dependency tracer allows me a lot more ability to go through and change things. I can actually modify the code right here. I can still interact with Excel at the same time. I'm not locked out of Power Query, and I can actually push update to push it back into the model. So that was one of the cool things that we did in there. The DAX Sleuth, you can see that we actually have an awful lot of stuff going on in here. And if I go and pick up my amount column, you'll notice that it's got a ton of places that the amount is being used, including OLAP formulas. On this worksheet, I can go and select the individual cells if I want to see where they go. So it's kind of a neat little component as well. This was also instrumental. One of the big reasons here I built this was because when I went to refresh this, it was taking a long time. Which query took the longest? It's forecast. Everything else was actually quick. Which query am I going to go and try and spend my time optimizing? It's obviously forecast. So this is a tool that I used in order to try and actually figure some of these things out. If I go and take a look at the model summary on this guy here, we'll see that this is going to come back and it's going to have a ton of stuff going on inside this one as well. We've got 46 queries. We have one direct link table, no external data sources, everything through Power Query, and you can see that we've got a bunch of different stats around all kinds of things. And I'd use this to go back and audit what's going on, because this information here also gives me level 1 staging query. These are all of the queries that are actually dependent on it. These are the queries that are precedent on it, so I can actually see the chain in this particular case. And there's a lot of different things that we want to do. As I say, I've got about, Abdullah can tell you, we have a huge list of things that we actually want to add to this particular product. Now that I've shown you this, you know that I'm in a specific file. It's called Model Sleuth EA. I can see this on the Query Sleuth. It tells me up the top. I can see it on the DAX Sleuth as well. It will tell me up the top. What I'd now like to do is I'd like to sort of almost round this thing out. I'm going to go connect to a Power BI desktop file, this one here called LP Azure SQL, and I want to show you what I can actually do with Power BI. Basically, my deal is this. I can read from Power BI. I'm not going to write back to Power BI. Just say my world is generally Excel-based. We may get there one day. It depends on what actually happens. But for the majority of stuff, we're actually reading from Power BI. One of the first things that I will do when I actually meet with someone in a live Q&A session, if they have a Power BI model, is I will attempt to do exactly this. I'll connect to their model. It says, okay, cool. So we'll launch your Power BI desktop file for you. And at that point, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go and run a model summary report. Notice right now we're in the EA for Model Sleuth here. We are going to be getting a new one that's going to come up. It will replace this page. I would normally do this in a new workbook, but I want to show you we can do it in the same place. This is the summary for LP Azure. So I've actually picked up all of the information. I've got my disconnected, my Snowflake tables. I've got a particular table in here that bothers me greatly. This is the default date table that is turned on inside Power BI. I actually ran this against one client, and we found a huge amount of date tables. It was taking a massive amount of space in this model. We got it so much more efficient by just trimming those out. All we had to do was uncheck the default table stuff from Power BI. You can see that we've got our query list. It's actually quite short down the bottom here because most of the stuff comes directly from Azure Database Tables. But again, a nice quick summary for what we actually have for documentation to be able to go and actually look for key things that we may be concerned about, like calculated columns or data connections that are in the wrong places, and disconnected or snowflake tables, what our DAX measures look like. Speaking of DAX, you can actually take a look at my dependency tracer inside here. These are all of the individual measures that are going for LP Azure. So we can actually see that some of these things are built similar to one of the workbooks that you saw before, but all of those things, they still indent and do all this kind of work and whatnot. Notice that we cannot duplicate, update these things back to the model because I'm not writing to Power BI. But if we do make changes in the Power BI model, I can click refresh and it will refresh it from Power BI so I get the most up-to-date version. I can see the query sleuth as well. This is directly from LP Azure. If I go take a look at the calendar table, these are all of the individual queries that are working with this particular data set as well. And I can also run a couple of other model sleuth reports, well, one other model sleuth report, like the memory usage summary, that will actually tell me what's going on. The big difference between the memory usage here for this one and what you see for an Excel file, I don't know if these are being used. Right now, we have not invested in trying to parse all of the individual visuals inside Power BI to see whether or not a field is being used in a visual. One day we will get there. We do look at all of the model measures, calculated columns, all the stuff around the data model. We just need to do the visuals. We just haven't had the time investment in order to be able to make that actually happen yet. Things you can't run, unused columns or unused items for that reason. Another feature I do want to show you, though, if you happen to be familiar with dynamic management views, we actually have the ability to do this in either Excel or Power BI. I'm connected to Power BI right now, so I can go and create a DMV against measures that shows me all of the individual measures that we have inside this file. This is also completely editable, so I can go and actually add myself a where clause on this, and I can say where the name equals, let's go with sales dollars. And now if I go and create, it will replace that DMV. I can actually now go and start selecting individual columns and doing what I need in order to write the SQL query. This used to be really, really hard. If you wanted to do this kind of work and interrogate your models, you'd basically end up at Chris Webb's website trying to look for some information on how to do this. Then you'd have to knock up some code to try and get this to work. I just made this easy. Here you go. Run your queries and away you go. You still need to know how to write the SQL. I can't do that for you. Oh, well, I can. All of these ones are by default, but if you want to tweak them, you need to do your own work. Again, it works based on both Excel and Power BI. For Power BI models, we actually have both the TM schema and Discover components. And if we go back to the classic Excel model, the only ones that work is Discover. So, but it'll automatically default to the correct place for you on that one as well. The final thing I want to show you before we round this one out is we also have the ability to import and export some things. One of my big plans, as I mentioned earlier, is to import a model back from Power BI into Excel, but we also have the ability to do things like exporting things. You can export your full model to a text file backup and re-import it. I am working on being able to recreate it in Excel. This would be a backup point if your Excel model goes horribly wrong, to be able to rebuild the Power Query and Power Pivot structure. There's a few things that I have to be careful of, though, because I can't create hidden columns and I can't create calculated columns, even though I can create measures. But regardless, one of the things I got asked for by one of our clients is we'd like to export our queries to a new worksheet in a new workbook. So we said, okay, sure. So at this point, this is exactly what's going to happen. And this is actually I had a bug with this in my webcast earlier today. We've now fixed it. But what you'll notice is that we've actually extracted every single query to a new worksheet on a new workbook. Away it goes. The reason behind this is they have a separate differencing tool. So they wanted to do this, lock it down to say, here we go. We've got a nice little tool set here that we can lock down what the state was. We can run another one, and then they can difference between the two to see what's changed. One day we'll look at differencing as well eventually, but not quite at this point in time. The last thing I want to say on this one is that there is full documentation underneath the user guide here. This will download a PDF. It's about 70 pages long, I think, right now. I need to push some new updates into it based on the thing around creating relationships and whatnot, and there's an awful lot more coming from this. So that's a pretty good run through of what the Monkey Tools suite will actually do. Yeah, I mean, I guess at this point in time, I would would love to hear if anybody's got any questions. I'm happy to take them. Otherwise, there will be a recording of this available. Is that right, Yana? We've actually got this one recording this time, so that's cool. So people can watch it back later. Oh. Okay, here's a question. Cool. What's the minimum Microsoft 365 version in order to work with Power BI Pro, sharing reports with users outside the organization? Think Power BI Pro needs? No, you can share Power BI Pro or Power BI reports outside the org under just a Pro license. Can you not, Yana?
If they have a Power BI Pro license, they can view the report. If you publish it to the web, and this is not recommended, but you can do that, and then it's open completely to everyone in the world to enjoy.
Yeah,
and
you definitely can.
Do
like
authentication of B2B.
Yeah, if I'm in my tenant, I can actually build a Power BI report, and I can share it with Yana and her Microsoft tenant. She'll be able to see it. So, and I mean, I have a Pro license. They obviously have a lot more power and whatever else, but I don't believe there's an admin center or anything like that that's required, not in my testing. So, Joanne, can you share the recording with others? Okay, yeah, no, don't need to be an admin, no. Joanne, can you share the recording with others at work? Hey, man, this is 100% public. You bet. Share it with everybody. As a matter of fact, please share it with everybody. I'd love people to know what this thing actually does. So, on that note, I should probably actually flip back over to my my closing slide here and just put that up. If you are interested in learning more about Monkey Tools, the best place to get advised of updates is probably to follow my blog or my newsletter, which you can sign up to via my blog. The product page for Monkey Tools on my website directly is excelguru.ca/monkeytools. That will take you to a full page that has all of the feature comparisons, some demos, and whatever else. Gives you a link to the documentation, talks about the pricing options and all that kind of jazz. You can also follow me on social media at Facebook, at Twitter, at LinkedIn, and any other place you can find me, because I'm in a bunch of them as well. So on that note, I am going to round this one off and say thank you very much for coming. I am going to kill off this slide here, and I'm going to throw up a different one. I'm actually going to not advance the slides on these guys here, but I'm just going to go to this one. I want to throw out a big shout out to our sponsors on this one. XL Guru, my company, is actually one of the sponsors of this user group meeting. This is the first time I've ever, well, second time actually that I've ever actually gone and talked about the software that we're dealing with here, and the first time I've done it here. I want to shout out a big shout out to Yana at Microsoft for organizing the Teams chat and getting all this kind of stuff done. For people who've been part of this user group for a long time, you know, Yana was part of the user group before she started at Microsoft. Microsoft has always been helpful, and Yana continues to do that for us as we go through this kind of stuff. It's a huge, huge help for us. And if it weren't for her, we wouldn't be doing online user groups, because she's the one that actually pushed me to get us going and getting this happening.
You would be there, don't worry, I'm sure.
Yeah, maybe. I don't know. I needed a push, man. There was a lot of stuff going on in our lives, so it was really helpful. I want to thank Past for kicking in and supporting us as well. And the last thing I wanted to let you know about is SkillWave.training is also a sponsor here as well. If you're interested in good self-service BI training, please check out our website. We got Power Query training, we got Power Pivot, Power BI training, we got all kinds of stuff going on. So please check that out as well. And thank you for the comments that it was worth being up at 2 to 3:30 in the morning in England for. And Christian, I think you said like 4 o'clock in the morning you're on. You know, thanks guys for coming. I really appreciate your support with this. And if you like what you see, please tell everybody. And if there's things that you think should be done on this one, please tell us, because this is definitely something we're investing in. We're pushing bug fixes, we're pushing features, and we want to make this bigger and better and help other people out there. So thank you very much for coming, folks.